Percy with an early run, he's onside this time! It's 1-1! It's 7! It's Mario Götze! What a goal! What a goal to win a World Cup!
Beermat World Cup podcast, getting to you with all the action that's just transpired. I am literally going in immediately after the final whistle of the third game, and we're going to switch things up actually, because normally I go from chronological order from the start to the finish, but we're going to do this backwards today purely because of the implications later on in the day. We're going to start with a game where the final whistle has just been blown. Switzerland 2, Serbia 1. Now, if you listen to the pre-World Cup podcast, the preview, you might know that my co-presenter on the normal show will be a bit peeved at the end result here, which saw Shaqiri get through in the last minute and score the goal, which sets up the final day quite nicely for them and sort of condemns Serbia. And what a difference 45 minutes makes. They went through at half time, and you know, it sort of all went downhill from there. It was a very even game throughout most of the 90. And the one thing I've got to say is that even if you don't like Switzerland, which at this point, you know, is my co-presenter and like probably most of Serbia right now, but what they managed to do very well, and probably better than a lot of sides, is stay in games. You're never going to bang these 4 or 5. And the thing that really does interest me actually is the idea that when a lot of sides, especially in World Cup games, especially in these group stage games where you know you've got one slip up can cost you the whole tournament, and for Serbia that might very well be the case, what you see is when it gets level, teams tend to shut down and just go, you know what, we'll take the draw. It doesn't matter the respective disparity between the sides. It's like, it's going to play out as this. And not only in this game, in all the games we've seen so far, there's not really been the case of that. And it's been more, we're just going to go for it regardless. And or at least one side has gone for it. There's not been a mutual taking of the draw just yet, which, especially when you consider the so-called powerhouse of this group and the predicament they find themselves in. Admittedly, they got themselves out of that. We'll get to that in a second. But you wondered whether Serbia and Switzerland might just shake hands on 60 here. This was not the case. They kept going and going. And before we get to, I know I mentioned him in the last podcast, Shaqiri's goal, I want to talk about Xhaka's goal, which is technique and a half, lads. I know you've got this in your locker, and maybe you show it more for Switzerland than you've ever shown in an Arsenal shirt, but it was kind of what got you the move to Arsenal in the first place. As for Shaqiri, the match winner, I had to go at him in the previous podcast for some of his decision making, but he's the main man for Switzerland. And do you know, there are certain players that raise the game. We've seen it in many World Cups before. We've seen it from Shaqiri before for Switzerland in tournaments. I would argue that he doesn't do this enough, and if you're capable of this, then why not? The only thing I would say is, as has been said by the BBC, that defending, the step up of the halfway line, and I'm pretty sure the defender chasing him back. At first, I thought it was Ivanovic, because I'm not being funny, climate change moves faster than that break. It was slow, and there was still no stopping him. Managed to get the goal. Serbia will have complaints. The fact that Mitrovic wasn't even given a chance of a penalty in VAR when he was being basically double suplexed, but they'll have their chance against Brazil, and whether they can take that it's going to be fascinating. I'm not sure, but in a one-off game like this where it's pretty much like you win, you go through, you lose, there's some bullshittery going to happen, then, you know, I think we're in for something fantastic. And I already think Mitrovic has been warned by the referee that he's on his last. If it's possible for someone to get 4 yellow cards in the game, then Mitrovic might go for it. He might go for the super red. He might go for a supernova, you know. We'll see how that goes down. Next up, the middle game of the day, Nigeria 2, Iceland 0. Well, there's a spanner in the works for all the Iceland fanboys, and I actually include myself in that. The group had been set up perfectly with Croatia's result yesterday, that so long as there was a winner in this game, then, you know, it was going to be intriguing. But for the longest time, it looked like it was going to be 0-0, and it didn't look like Nigeria, especially on the evidence of the first game, had it in them to get the result that would sort of let Argentina off the hook. But not only did they do it, they did it like quite comfortably in the end. And I know it's strange, so often we see in football games where it's like it's tight and there's nothing to play for, and one incident can change that. And which is what we say, goals change games, because that game went from a nothing sort of 0-0. Still haven't had one in the tournament yet, to all-out warfare. And I only dread to think, well, I say I dread to think, but like, it would have been amazing if Iceland scored that penalty at the end, how chaotic it might have ended up being. And the other thing as well, that it goes without mentioning, is what the teams do when like there's an underdog mentality and when there's not. Like Iceland have been able to do what they've done against England in the past in the Euros, against Portugal, against Argentina on the weekend, because no one's backing them, no one's got any hopes or aspirations of them getting the 3 points, because that's clearly far beyond them, because they have a country of population of like 2. That's what we keep being told. And today, based on the back of these results, they were the favourites, and they didn't live up to that tag at all, and they weren't able to break them down. And toward the end, they were run ragged. Like the idea that Messi can't breach this defence, but Musa is like what we think Messi should have been. That's quite impressive. And now Nigeria have the chance of matching up against Argentina, a side that they've seen many times before, and is in complete disarray. And they'll be looking at that going, same as a lot of the way these groups are lining up, it's a big team that hasn't performed so far, setting up against the side that has the wind in its sail, so to speak. And do you know what? Stranger things have happened in the World Cup than Nigeria putting this on. After all this time, Nigeria putting it on against this Argentina side. Alternatively, Messi could just turn it on. They could turn up in the tournament and then steamroller the rest of it. But I know which one is more likely. I'll let you decide which. Right, we're going to get to now the first game of the day, which was, for the longest time, we talk about a game that was set up for 0-0, the Iceland-Nigeria game. Brazil 2, Costa Rica 0. Someone brought this to my attention earlier, actually, and it's quite interesting, the idea that one of the reasons why they're second favourites, obviously they're Brazil, and they've got this reputation and name and the players in and amongst them, but it is the way they qualified. And you look at the South American sides and the way they've put themselves about in this tournament, you actually sort of understand that that's not as impressive as it initially looked. And after you get past the first 30 minutes against Brazil, and Costa Rica themselves actually are a side that have, not just in this tournament, but in the previous one, they've been up against this before. This is the whole thing about being underdogs and what you're going to do and how you're going to perform. Like, they know what their roles are. This is a scenario they've done, and it's just a case you get to 30, you get to 60, their chances to like win it on the counter themselves. And yes, they're not great at decision making. And speaking of decision making, the VAR call for Neymar's non-penalty, I've heard a few murmurs about whether that should have been a dive or not. I'm not entirely sure on that, but this, I think, is where we can finally turn around and say the technology is working, because so much has been said about how it's robbing the underdogs of the glory, it's robbing the underdogs of the moment. This would have been a genuine like steal for Brazil, and that happens more often than not. When a big team plays a small team, they get the breaks, and this is a kind of way that to sort of settle that score, not completely, but just, I think it may have proven, and again I say that the idea that Mitrovic doesn't get the penalty even looked at later on, but I was going to say it may have proven that maybe this is actually a good thing for the rest of the tournament and for football in general. The debate will continue to rage, because it doesn't matter what we do with the game, debate will continue to rage. Fascinating last game, as I say, set up against Serbia, and Costa Rica officially eliminated, unfortunately for them. Switzerland will fancy their chances to top the group, and as I said, these last games are lining themselves up perfectly. We're going to get, if you think this is kicking off now, we haven't seen anything yet. I am very much looking forward to tomorrow, another round of games, as we get closer to the group stage closing off. I'm going to have to sign off, and please believe I am ready for some more.